For 6 years, Ethan Cole had lived like a ghost on the edge of Lake Superior. And on the night he finally decided he was done fighting, something on 4 legs came scratching at his door. The January storm over Marquette, Michigan was not just bad weather. It was a full-on siege. Snow drove sideways in blinding sheets, rattling the windows of the old bait shop Ethan had turned into a half-finished cabin. Wind screamed off the frozen lake, whipping loose shingles and moaning through every gap in the warped wood. The power had gone out an hour ago. The only light came from a single oil lamp on the table and the dull orange eye of the wood stove, steadily losing its fight against the cold. Ethan sat in the dark with a foreclosure notice in his hand and a bottle of cheap whiskey within easy reach. He was 39, but looked older, like someone had carved extra years into the lines around his eyes. The lean, coiled strength of a Navy SEAL was still there, under the flannel shirt and thermal pants, but it was buried under months of bad sleep and worse memories. His black hair was too long, his beard rough and uneven, like he'd started shaving and then forgotten why halfway through. The letter on the table was simple, clinical, and merciless. Notice of sale. Final date of occupancy. Failure to remit. In 3 weeks, the bank would take the building. The bait shop his father had bought, the dock where Ethan had learned to swim in water cold enough to burn, the last piece of anything that felt like home. Gone. It should have hurt more than it did. Mostly he just felt tired. He'd failed at civilian life the way he'd failed at everything since that night in Syria. The night a drone strike he'd called in hit the wrong warehouse. The footage had played on news loops for weeks. Smoke, fire, and the sickening revelation that the coordinates the intel boys sent him were wrong, that the munitions cache was an aid station staffed by local volunteers. They'd called it a tragic error, a fog of war incident. Ethan's brain didn't use those words. His brain only knew one: murderer. The Navy had quietly retired him with full honors and a closed-door reprimand. The talk shows moved on. The country forgot. He never did. Now, with the bank letter staring up at him and the wind clawing at the walls, the idea of walking down to the frozen shoreline and just lying down, letting the cold do what it was so good at, didn't feel like a nightmare. It felt like relief. He slid the notice aside and reached for the bottle. That was when he heard it, a faint scratch at the door. He froze, the whiskey halfway to his lips. The wind howled. The lake groaned somewhere beyond the snow-choked windows. Then it came again. Scratch, scratch. Not the random rattle of a loose board, not the heavy thud of drifting ice. Something alive, something persistent. Ethan's muscles moved before his mind caught up. Training, buried but not dead, resurfaced in the smallest ways. He set the bottle down. His hand closed around the flashlight on the table, thumb finding the switch like it had been doing it every day. 3 strides took him to the door. For a moment, he just stood there, palm resting on the cold metal latch, listening. The storm screamed on the other side. Under it, a low, uncertain whine threaded through the noise. He opened the door. The wind slammed into him like a physical blow, throwing fine needles of snow into his face, snatching his breath away. The beam from his flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the whiteout. Something dark and low to the ground staggered on the top step, half covered in snow. It was a German shepherd. He was big, even half collapsed. Thick winter coat dusted in ice, powerful shoulders shaking with each shuddering breath. One ear stood alert, the other bent at the tip, scarred and pale. His front right leg was lifted off the ground, paw tucked in against his chest in a tight, protective curl. But it was his eyes that stopped Ethan cold. Amber, clear, focused on him with a kind of desperate, intelligent intent that didn't look like simple fear. The dog tried to stand straighter, as if ashamed to be seen weak. His legs bowed. He swayed. "You picked one hell of a night," Ethan muttered. The words came out rough, a voice he barely recognized. He didn't think. He simply moved. He dropped the flashlight into the snow, stepped forward into the screaming wind, and hooked his arms under the dog's chest and haunches. The shepherd was heavier than he looked, but Ethan hauled him inside in one smooth, practiced motion, kicking the door shut behind them with a solid thud that cut the storm down to a muffled roar. Snow spattered the floorboards, quickly melting in the relative warmth. The dog collapsed onto his side, chest heaving. Steam rose from his fur. Ethan's hands that hadn't touched another living creature in longer than he cared to admit, automatically found pressure points, checking ribs, spine, joints. Hypothermia, minor cuts along the pads. The right paw was worse, sliced by something sharp, painful, but fixable. It was only when his fingers brushed the dog's collar that his breath caught. Not because of the collar itself. That was just worn leather, cracked and dark with age. Because hanging from it, on a short piece of paracord, was a coin. A round brass challenge coin, edges worn, emblem faded by years of being turned over in nervous fingers. Ethan didn't need light to see the design. He knew it by touch, a trident, a skull. The motto of SEAL Team 4 stamped in a circle. Into the dark, his team, his coin, the one he had slipped into the casket of his commanding officer, Lieutenant Noah Briggs, before they lowered him into the ground in Arlington. Ethan stared at it, his heart suddenly thudding too hard against his ribs. He closed his fist around the coin, knuckles whitening. "Where the hell did you get this?" I whispered. The dog's eyes opened, hazy with exhaustion, but still locked on him. The shepherd didn't flinch, didn't growl. He just looked at Ethan as if to say, "I found you, now get up." Something shifted in Ethan's chest. Not much, not enough to be hope, but enough to keep his fingers from reaching for the bottle again. Instead, he went for the first aid kit. He cleaned the dog's paw with warm water from the kettle, picking tiny shards of ice and glass from the cut. The shepherd winced once, very slightly, but didn't pull away. Ethan wrapped the paw carefully, his big hands surprisingly gentle as the old muscle memory of combat triage came back in flashes. Tourniquets, field dressings, the metallic smell of blood and dust still a ghost in his nostrils. "Whoever you belong to," he muttered, "they trained you well." The dog's tail thumped once against the floor, like agreement. When he was done, Ethan stepped back, suddenly unsure what to do with himself. The wood stove was sputtering. He fed it 2 more logs, watching the flames lick higher. The cabin brightened, but only just. Outside, the storm hammered on, as if furious that something inside had refused to freeze. The shepherd? No, he needed a name. Shifted, carefully testing his weight on the bandaged paw. Pain flickered across his face, but the dog pushed through it, forcing himself upright. He shook violently, sending droplets of melted snow in all directions, and then stood, squarely facing Ethan. That coin on his collar swung gently between them. "Rex," Ethan said quietly, the name coming out of nowhere and landing with the weight of something inevitable. "You look like a Rex." He didn't expect a reaction. He got one anyway. The dog's ears pricked, his head tilted the slightest bit, his tail gave a small, decisive wag, as if he'd been waiting for someone to say the word out loud. Rex took 3 deliberate steps forward until he stood within arm's reach. Ethan's hand moved of its own accord, landing on the thick ruff at his neck. Warmth seeped into his fingers, up his arm, all the way into that hollow place in his chest. "Okay, Rex," he murmured. "You win. You're in." He should have left it at that. A strange, half-frozen dog on a terrible night, carrying an impossible coin like some kind of cruel joke from the universe. But something about the way Rex kept glancing at the door, then back at him, set Ethan's teeth on edge. This wasn't a dog looking for shelter. This was a dog on a mission, furious at his own injured paw for slowing him down. And he'd brought an order. The brass coin in Ethan's hand felt suddenly heavier. He turned it over. On the back, beneath the trident and the skull, something new had been scratched into the metal with rough, uneven strokes, a set of numbers, not coordinates. They didn't look like any grid he knew, not a phone number either. It took his sluggish brain a moment to place the format. A storage unit, in town, row, building, door. Cold washed through him, in a way that had nothing to do with the storm. He hadn't been back to Marquette proper in months. The storage facility on the edge of town was where his father had kept extra boats and old fishing gear. Ethan had given up that unit a year ago when the money started to run dry, but he hadn't cleared it out himself. He'd mailed the key back, told the manager to sell whatever was inside. So how? Rex whined softly as if sensing his hesitation. Then he did something that made the hair on Ethan's neck stand up. He walked to the door, sat down in front of it, and waited. The storm roared. The lake groaned. The foreclosure notice fluttered in a gust from beneath the door. Outside, the temperature was dropping toward lethal. The roads would be a mess. No one sane would willingly drive into that. But Ethan had stopped considering himself sane a long time ago. He looked at Rex, at the coin, at the scribbled unit number. Then he grabbed his coat. "Of course," he muttered. "Of course you show up now." He shrugged into the heavy parka hanging by the door, pulled on his gloves, and snatched his truck keys from the nail where they'd hung untouched for weeks. Rex rose as soon as Ethan touched the latch, favoring his right paw but clearly ready. "You're insane," Ethan told him. Rex's stare said, "Takes one to know one." It tuit buses astis. The storm hit them like a wall the second they stepped outside. Snow had piled in drifts against the side of the bait shop, half burying Ethan's old Ford. He dug out enough to wrench the door open and get the engine coughing to life, the exhaust curling up in a pale ghost against the night. Rex hesitated only long enough for Ethan to pat the seat. "Up." The shepherd climbed in, bandage paw careful on the cracked vinyl, and sat straight in the passenger seat like he'd done it 1,000 times. Ethan pulled onto the road, or what passed for a road now. The world beyond his headlights was a swirling tunnel of white. The tires slipped, caught, slipped again. Every instinct in him screamed that this was stupid, reckless, suicidal. Another instinct, older and sharper, whispered, "Mission briefed, execute." The storage facility loomed out of the white like a ship breaking through fog. A long row of metal doors, half invisible under the clinging snow. Security cameras blind and glassy in their housings. The front office lights were dark. The gate stood open, chain bent back like someone had forced it hours before. That made Ethan's shoulders tense. He turned the truck in slowly, low beams cutting through the curtained snow. "Which one?" he asked. He wasn't expected an answer. Rex gave one. He leaned forward, nose almost touching the windshield, ears pricked toward the far end of the row. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not of fear, but urgency. Ethan parked near the last units, leaving the engine, running. Snow slapped at his face as he stepped out. Rex hit the ground beside him with a heavy thump, barely favoring the injured paw now. The numbers scratched into the coin glowed in his mind as he walked. Building C Unit 27. The roll-up door had a different lock than the others. Newer, shiny brass, untouched by rust and salt. Ethan's gut dropped. He knew that lock. He'd issued a dozen of them himself over the years, whenever the unit needed to stash gear off-book between deployments. Military-grade padlocks, civilian exteriors, hardened guts. Briggs had been the one who'd insisted on them. Noah. Ethan reached into his pocket before he even realized why. His fingers brushed cold steel. A simple key he'd kept on his ring out of habit, never quite able to remember what it had once been for. The teeth matched the lock. Another impossible piece. The wind howled. He slid the key into the lock and turned. The shackle snapped open. He rolled the door up. Cold air rushed out at him from the dark interior. Not the damp chill of forgotten fishing gear. The cleaner, metallic cold of concrete and electronics. Ethan clicked on his flashlight. The beam swept across a space that had been stripped bare of anything that ever belonged to his father. At the back of the unit, occupying almost the entire rear wall, was a steel cabinet bolted to the concrete floor. A single folding chair sat in front of it. On the chair, sealed in clear plastic to keep away damp and dust, was a rugged black laptop case and a thin envelope with his name scrawled across the front in a handwriting he hadn't seen since the funeral. Noah Briggs. Ethan's throat closed. He stepped inside on legs that didn't quite feel like his own. Rex stayed at his heel, pressed close, as if physically holding him up. He peeled the plastic away with numb fingers and tore the envelope open. A single sheet of paper slid out. "Cole, if you're reading this, the world did what I expected, and you did exactly what I was afraid you'd do. Disappear. I can't stop what they're going to do to you. I couldn't even stop what they did to me, but I can give you this, the truth. It's in the drive inside the case, not the first drive, the second one, behind the false panel. You'll know it when you see it. Do not open it from a house, a library, a cafe, or anything with a normal router. You open it from here or from somewhere you can walk away from when it starts to burn. I tried to fight them from the inside. They used you as the scapegoat when I got too close. I'm sorry. You were never the monster, Ethan. We both know who is. When it's time, Rex will find you. Briggs. His vision blurred halfway through. He had to stop, blink hard, force his brain to keep moving across the words. The edges of the paper cut into his fingers. Rex whined once softly. When Ethan looked down, the shepherd's gaze was steady, anchoring him. Rex, he whispered. You were his? The dog's tail brushed the floor. Something like grief flickered in those amber eyes. Briggs was dead. Ethan had stood at his grave, folded the flag, given the speech, throat torn, raw. Hadn't he? He set the letter down and popped the latches on the laptop case. Inside, nestled in molded foam, was a matte black laptop built like a brick, a small portable hotspot with a military contractors logo half scratched away, and a stack of solid-state drives labeled with innocuous names. Backup A, Backup B, Logistics, and one tucked flat against the lid, behind a plastic cover that didn't quite match. He pried it loose. No label, just a strip of tape with 3 letters written in Briggs's hurried scrawl. Ace. He didn't understand it, not yet. But a lifetime of missions had taught him one thing. When your best man left you a trail in his own blood and guilt, you followed it, even if it hurt, especially if it hurt. The wind had eased by the time they got back to the bait shop, but the snow was deeper, muffling the world under a thick, heavy silence. Ethan's truck growled as it clawed its way back to the shoreline, tires throwing slush. Inside, he lit the lamp again and set the laptop on the table, Briggs's letter beside it. Rex circled once in front of the stove and lay down, his head on his paws, eyes never leaving Ethan. You already know how this ends, don't you? Ethan muttered. The dog didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ethan powered the laptop on. It booted into a bare-bones system. No icons, no wallpaper, just a black screen and a blinking cursor. Briggs had stripped it down. Security, not convenience. He connected the hotspot, watched it establish a signal bouncing through a network that definitely didn't belong to any civilian ISP. Then he slid the drive labeled ACE into the port. The cursor paused. Lines of text began to crawl across the screen. Commands executed. Directories opened. A password prompt appeared. Access phrase. Beneath it, a hint. First name, last word. Ethan stared at it, hearing the echo of a voice in his head. Briggs on that last video chat before the Syria op, signing off with a crooked grin. Into the dark, Cole, we go together. The last word. He typed it. Dark. The screen flickered. For a second, he thought he'd guessed wrong. Then a progress bar appeared. Decrypting. He watched it creep from left to right, each percentage point a heartbeat. Rex shifted once, nostrils flaring, ears flicking toward the window, as if he heard something far beyond the walls. When the bar hit 100, the laptop beeped, soft and final. The screen filled with files, hundreds of them, financial ledgers, email chains. Scans of contracts between the Department of Defense and a private firm whose name made Ethan's stomach lurch. Archer Coleman Enterprises. ACE. He'd seen their logo before, on the hover drones humming over their heads in Syria, on the armored trucks escorting convoys in and out of the city. A logistics and technology company, the reporters had called them. A trusted partner in modern war. He opened the first ledger, columns of numbers, dates, locations. A neat line of payments from ACE to a subsidiary he didn't recognize. Another line from that subsidiary to a foreign shell corporation. Another from that shell to an account linked to a man Ethan knew all too well. A politician who'd made a name for himself railing about patriotism and sacrifice on the cable news circuit. And in a side column, almost casually, a series of notes. Media deal confirmed, appropriations secured, casualty spikes tolerated. His jaw clenched. The emails were worse. Messages between executives talking about managed outrage and profitable escalation. Casual references to steering targeting packages toward locations that would generate useful headlines when accidental tragedies occurred. The cold, clinical way they talked about human beings, civilians, volunteers, soldiers, as numbers and leverage. And in a folder marked SYR-17, he found the strike. His strike. The one that had shredded his career and gutted his soul. The original coordinates, the ones Briggs had briefed him on. A warehouse on the far edge of the city, away from known civilian infrastructure. Then, 6 minutes before launch, another file. An override. New coordinates, approved through an ACE channel, authorized by someone in their targeting division. A quick, clean switch masked in a routine update. The system had logged it. Briggs had downloaded the log. Someone had tried very hard to delete it later. Not hard enough. Ethan's hands shook. He'd spent 6 years drowning in the belief that his mistake had killed those volunteers. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been a decision. Made for him. Above him. Using him. His fingers dug into the table so hard the wood creaked. A hand, no, not a hand, a paw, nudged his thigh. Rex had come to sit beside him, pressing his head against Ethan's leg, anchoring him to the present, to the table, to the wood stove and the storm and the harsh yellow circle of the lamp, to the fact that the people responsible were still breathing. Briggs had died trying to stop them. They'd needed a face to plaster on the screen, a villain to feed to the public, a good soldier with a clean record, the perfect tragic monster. They'd picked Ethan. He could feel the shape of the plan now, the way Briggs must have. Too late, trapped in a tangle of classified files and political pressure, the kind of trap you don't dig your way out of. So Briggs had done what he could. He'd turned the trap into a weapon and waited for someone stubborn enough to pick it up. Thunder rolled low over the lake, though there was no lightning, just wind. Or maybe that was his own pulse in his ears. The laptop beeped again, a soft tone that made him flinch. A small window had appeared in the corner of the screen, blinking. Remote access. Ping detected. Source. Unknown. Trace. Blocking. Partial. Ethan's stomach turned to ice. Of course they're watching, he breathed. Briggs's warning echoed in his head. Don't open it from anywhere you can't walk away from when it starts to burn. He'd opened it from the bait shop, his last piece of home. Rex's ears were fully up now, head turned toward the north wall where the wind hit hardest. He growled, low and long. Headlights swept across the frosted window, not from the road, from the shore. Someone had come in quiet, lights off until the last minute, slipping along the frozen edge of the lake where no sane driver would risk getting stuck. Professional. Ethan snapped the laptop closed. The room plunged into deeper shadow. He grabbed Briggs's letter, the ace drive, and the coin in one motion and shoved them into an inner pocket. Rex, he said softly. Down. The shepherd slid under the table, body pressed flat, invisible in the gloom. Ethan killed the lamp. The world contracted to sound. Gravel crunching under tires. An engine ticking as it cooled. Soft mutters as doors opened and closed. Boots on snow. More than 2. Less than 10. A delicate insect-like whine threaded through the air above the storm, almost too high to hear. Drone. They weren't just here to knock on his door and talk. They were scanning. He moved through the dark with the easy, silent grace they had beaten into him in Coronado, every floorboard mapped in muscle memory. His fingers found the shotgun by the door, then slid past it to the older, colder weight hanging on the peg above, his father's rifle. A battered .30-06 whose wooden stock fit against his shoulder like a handshake. Not the weapon he would have chosen for a mission, but the weapon he had. He chambered around, the click lost under a gust of wind. Outside, a voice called out, overbright and friendly. Mr. Cole, this is Officer Merritt with County Sheriffs. We got a report that you might need help. Mind if we step in, make sure you're all right? Ethan leaned against the wall beside the door and closed his eyes for one heartbeat. They always started that way. Smiles and concern. A pretense of normal. Then the real work began. He took a breath, felt it settle in his chest, steady and deep. The man who'd been ready to walk into the lake 10 minutes ago was gone. In his place was the operator who'd gone into villages at 3 a.m. and come back out with everyone breathing, except the ones who didn't deserve to. Rex, he whispered. The dog's eyes caught a sliver of light, twin embers in the dark. Remember what Briggs wrote? Time to fight them from the outside. He didn't need Rex to understand the words. He just needed him to stand when he did. He didn't open the door. He stepped out the back instead. The bait shop had 2 exits. His father's paranoia about fires and drunks paying off years later. Ethan slid into the narrow gap between the building and the scrubby line of pines, moving low, keeping the wind at his back. Snow stung his face, his eyelashes crusted in seconds. He blinked it away and listened. 3, 4 sets of boots crunching around front. One hanging back, heavier, pacing more slowly. The watcher, the one calling the shots. The drone's whine shifted overhead as it looped. He froze under the sagging eave, letting his heartbeat sink with the waves pounding under the ice. Then he tapped his thigh, once. Rex slipped out beside him, a gray-black shadow against the snow, blending with the night. The bandaged paw barely slowed him. His breath puffed white. His ears swept the darkness. Circle, Ethan breathed. The shepherd vanished into the storm. Ethan moved. He ghosted around the far corner, keeping the bulk of the building between him and the headlights. The shapes out front were just silhouettes from here. Bulky parkas, hoods up, rifles held low but ready. Not sheriff's department issue, too sleek, too uniform. Ace's private security, of course. The watcher stood near the truck, a big SUV with no markings, plates half obscured by snow. He was taller than the others, shoulders broad under a heavy coat that probably had ceramic plates hidden inside. He wasn't holding a weapon. He didn't need to. This was a man used to giving orders, not carrying them out. As Ethan watched, the man lifted a gloved hand. "Cole!" he shouted, voice cutting through the wind with the cold confidence of someone who expected obedience. "We're not here to hurt you. We just need to chat. You opened something you shouldn't have. We're here to help you make that go away." Ethan raised the rifle, eyes sliding down the iron sights. He didn't fire, not yet. He took aim instead at the drone buzzing overhead, just visible as a dark, darting shape against the snow-churned clouds when the headlights struck it at the right angle. He calculated the wind, the drift, the drop, all in a heartbeat. Then he squeezed. The rifle kicked. The shot cracked like a whip, echoing off the lake and into the black trees. The drone coughed sparks and dropped, a smoking bug falling from the sky to vanish in the drifts. Men shouted. 3 rifles swung toward the sound. Ethan was already moving, cutting sideways, using the snow and dark as cover. He fired again, not to hit flesh, but to punch a neat hole in the SUV's front tire. The rig sagged with a hiss. "Contact left!" someone yelled. They scattered, scrambling for cover that didn't exist on the wide, open stretch of icy ground between the bait shop and the lake. The watcher stayed where he was. Interesting. "Cole!" he called, unruffled. "You know how this works. We can do it the easy way or the hard way. The court-martial didn't break you. Maybe prison will." The name hit like a slap. Memories flashed. Windowless rooms. Hard. Chairs. Men in uniforms who wouldn't look him in the eye. Rex's growl rolled out from the tree line. Warning and promise. Ethan stepped out from behind the corner at last. Rifle leveled, but pointed at the snow a foot in front of the watcher's boots. "Funny thing," he said, voice flat. "I've already done my time." The nearest security man jerked his weapon up. The watcher lifted 2 fingers, and he froze. Up close, the man's face was all sharp angles and smooth skin, handsome in a TV politician way. His eyes, though, his eyes were dead. "You're making a mistake," he said, smiling faintly. "We can plug this leak. Nobody has to know. You hand over what Briggs left you, and you can keep hiding out here on your little frozen rock until the lake finishes you off. Or," he gestured toward the bait shop, dismissive, "or you say no, and we take you in on a national security violation. That story about the poor, confused veteran who bombed the wrong building, it gets a sequel, and this time, there's no sympathy." "Who are you?" Ethan asked. The man tilted his head, amused. "Name's not important. I work for people who sign your pension checks." "Archer Coleman?" Ethan said. The man's smile didn't change, but something in his posture did. A tightening, a microsecond flinch. "Careful, Cole," he murmured. "That's the kind of name that gets you disappeared." Rex stepped out of the storm then, like a shadow solidifying. He came behind one of the gunmen, silent as a dream until the last 2 paces. Then he exploded forward, slamming into the back of the man's knees. The guy went down with a yell, rifle flying from his hands. Teeth closed around his forearm, not tearing, not maiming, but locking, crushing muscle hard enough to make the man scream and drop any thought of reaching for a sidearm. Another guard spun, barrel swinging toward the dog. Ethan didn't think. The rifle cracked again. The bullet hit the snow 6 inches from the man's boot, throwing a plume into his face. He cursed and staggered back, blinded for a second. "Don't," Ethan said, voice like ice. "He's done more for this country than you ever will." The watcher's gaze flicked between Ethan and Rex, calculating. "You can't win this," he said calmly. "There are more teams on the way. You're a dead man walking, Cole. Don't make us cut you down like a rabid dog." Ethan stepped closer, snow squeaking under his boots. "You picked the wrong metaphor," he said. "That rabid dog is the only reason I'm still breathing." Something like annoyance flashed in the man's eyes. Then he sighed. "Fine," he said. "Have it your way." His hand dipped into his coat. Ethan's finger tightened. Rex moved first. The shepherd released the arm he'd been holding and lunged, a gray blur in the storm. He hit the watcher full in the chest, teeth snapping inches from the man's throat, driving him backward into the side of the SUV. The man's hand cracked against the metal, and the small device he'd been reaching for, not a gun, Ethan realized dimly, but a remote of some kind, flew from his fingers, skittering across the ice. It slid to a stop under the SUV, red light blinking. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Rex, off!" he barked. The dog obeyed instantly, dropping away and back, hackles high, teeth bared. Ethan dived. He snagged the remote just as the watcher scrambled for it, both of them hitting the ground in a tangle of limbs. The man's knee slammed into Ethan's ribs hard enough to drive the breath from his lungs. "You don't know what you're playing with," the watcher hissed. Ethan rolled, using his weight, his training, the slick treachery of the ice. He came up on top, knee in the other man's chest, remote clutched in one hand and rifle in the other. "I'm a fast learner," he rasped. His thumb hovered over the button. The watcher's eyes went wide for the first time, fear breaking through the cold mask. "Don't," he snapped. "You'll bring the whole place down." "What place?" Ethan demanded. The man's lips pressed together. Ethan shifted his weight, just enough to make the man gasp. "Under the aid station," the watcher ground out. "Under the city. Under all of it. You think that warehouse in Syria was the only one? You think we'd risk everything on one building? The world runs on stories, Cole. On images. On outrage. We feed it. We manage it. We own it." He bared his teeth in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Briggs thought he could outplay us. He was wrong. You're wrong, too. You press that button, and you light up a network you can't even begin to understand. You won't just die. You'll start a war." Ethan stared down at him, chest heaving. Snow fell on them both, soft, deceptive, as if the world wasn't balancing on the edge of a trigger. Rex stood to the side now, watching, every muscle coiled. "You already started it," Ethan said. He didn't press the button. He turned it instead, and tossed it to Rex. The shepherd caught it delicately between his teeth, then trotted toward the lake. "Drop," Ethan ordered. Rex walked to the ragged edge where ice met heaving black water, jaws tightening just enough to crack the plastic casing before he spat it out. The remote slid over the ice and disappeared with a small splash into the freezing depths. The watcher made a strangled sound. Ethan leaned down, locking eyes with him. "You're right about one thing," he said quietly. "This is bigger than me. That's why you're walking away." The man blinked, disoriented. "You won't kill me?" he spat. "Coward." "You'd like that," Ethan said. "Dead men are easy to spin. You turn them into saints or devils, depending on what the poll numbers need. But a live whistleblower with proof you can't erase? That's harder." He jerked the man's collar up, hauling him close. "You're going to go back to whoever signs your checks," he murmured. "You're going to tell them something went wrong, that the files are loose, that you don't know where. And while they're tearing their own house apart trying to find them, I'm going to give them to someone who doesn't care whose campaign fund gets burned." The watcher's eyes flicked involuntarily toward the bait shop. "You already copied them," he realized. Ethan's silence was answer enough. Sirens wailed in the far distance, faint but growing. Real sirens this time, county sheriff, maybe state police, maybe federal, if Briggs's drive had tripped the right wires on the right servers before Acey's watchers cut the feed. Time was done. Ethan shoved the watcher away, sending him sprawling into the snow. "Call your boys off," he said. "Walk away. You shoot at that dog again, I reconsider letting you keep breathing." Rex's teeth gleamed in the headlights as if to underline the point. The watcher stared up at him, chest heaving, for a long, dangerous moment. Then he laughed, soft, ugly. "You think this ends with a story and a few orange jumpsuits?" he said. "You're adorable." "That's okay," Ethan said. "Rex thinks you're lunch." The man's gaze flicked to the shepherd, who did, in fact, look perfectly capable of chewing through a throat if politely asked. He raised his hands. "Stand down," he snapped to his men. "Back to the vehicles, we're done." One of them opened his mouth to protest. The watcher's glare cut him off. They piled into the SUV, engine roaring. The shredded tire flapped uselessly as the vehicle lurched into motion. They wouldn't get far like that, not in this snow, but they'd get gone. That was enough. For now. Ethan watched them go, the rifle hanging loose in his hand, the storm closing around their taillights until they were nothing but a smear of red swallowed by white. Then he realized his knees were shaking. He sank down onto the snow, suddenly boneless. Rex pushed against him, solid and warm, leaning his weight into Ethan's side. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, fingers tangling in the shepherd's fur. "You found me. You dragged me back. You stubborn, crazy boy." Rex huffed, breath clouding the air, and nudged his forehead under Ethan's arm until Ethan's hand rested on his neck like it belonged there. The sirens were closer now. The bait shop was still standing, for the moment. The Ace drive was still in his pocket. Briggs's letter still burned against his chest. He could run. Disappear again. Find a different frozen lake in a different lonely town. Or, he looked at Rex, into those clear, steady amber eyes. "We're done hiding," he said. Rex's tail thumped once. Decision made. The fallout came faster than he expected. He didn't tell the local deputies everything that night. He told them enough, that armed men had tried to force their way into his house, that he'd fired warning shots, that they'd run. The SUV with the shredded tire and the smoking wreck of a drone in the ditch down the road did most of the talking for him. Ace's people vanished before the state troopers arrived. The watcher left no name, no badge, nothing traceable. Ethan hadn't expected him to. It didn't matter. He had something better. 2 days later, in a cheap motel an hour inland, neutral ground, far from both the lake and his father's ghost, he sat across from a woman whose writing he'd read even in the darkest weeks, when everything else blurred. Her name was Avery Lane, investigative journalist, the one who'd pulled the curtain back on a contractor skimming fuel money off Afghan convoys, the one who'd written, in quiet, devastating prose, about the cost of sending the same few units back to war, again and again, while the rest of the country shopped. Her eyes were tired. Her notebook was full. Her phone was turned off, battery removed. Rex lay at Ethan's feet, head on his boots. "Why me?" she asked, not unkindly, when he slid the Ace drive and Briggs's letter across the table. "Why not go to JAG, IG, your congressman?" "Because I've seen what happens to reports that go through the proper channels," Ethan said. "They disappear. People who file them disappear. Or they get promoted sideways into an office with no windows until they forget why they wrote them in the first place." He swallowed. "Briggs trusted you. That's enough for me." Her brows rose at that. "You knew him?" she asked. "Not like I thought," Ethan said. "Turns out he was fighting a war on 2 fronts and never told me about the second one." He told her about the unit, about Briggs, about the aid station and the coordinates, about the storage unit and the letter, about the watcher and the remote, and the threat buried under the city. He didn't dramatize, didn't embellish, just laid the bones of it out, one after another. Avery wrote, and listened in the way only people who have seen too much of the world's ugliness can, with a set jaw and a soft, dangerous light in her eyes. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the hum of the heater and Rex's slow breathing. "You know they'll come after you," she said. "I know," he replied. "You know they'll try to discredit you, call you unstable, drag your record through the mud." "They already did," he said simply. Her gaze dropped to Rex. And him? Ethan's hand found the shepherd's ear. They come for him, he said, and that's the last mistake they ever make. Avery's mouth twitched. I can't promise you how this plays out, she said. Once this goes public, it's not mine anymore. Lawyers, editors, politicians, trolls, they all get a piece. Some days, it feels like throwing a match into a hurricane and hoping it lands somewhere useful. Briggs didn't die for a secret, Ethan said. He died trying to drag this into the light. That's all I'm asking. She nodded. Okay, she said. Then we start with the documents. We verify every line, every transfer, every email. We get corroboration from anyone still alive and willing to talk. And when we go big. She slid the drive into a padded envelope, sealed it, and locked it in the motel safe. 3 weeks later, the world exploded. Not in the way Ethan was used to. No shockwave, no heat, no dust, just words. Avery's story dropped on a Tuesday morning, pushed live by 3 major outlets at once, and mirrored on 100 smaller sites within minutes. The headline was simple. Contractors shifted U.S. targeting to boost profits. Documents show. Ethan didn't read the whole piece the first time. He couldn't. He saw enough. Screenshots of Ace's emails, quotes from anonymous field officers confirming patterns, a photo of Briggs in uniform, smiling like a man who didn't know the future yet, and had to step away, his vision blurring. Cable news picked it up by noon. By evening, senators who'd never heard of Archer Coleman the day before were demanding hearings. The Secretary of Defense stood in front of a lectern and promised full cooperation. Stock prices for Ace plunged. Lawsuits bloomed like mold after rain. Some talking heads called it treason. Others called it overblown. A tragic mix-up turned into a witch hunt. The internet called it everything. In the eye of that digital storm, one detail slipped through that made Ethan's knees buckle. Avery had insisted on it. In paragraph 12, after laying out the scheme and naming the key players, she wrote, "The company's actions came to light only because of a cache of documents preserved by a late Navy officer, Lator Noah Briggs, and delivered to this reporter by a former SEAL he once commanded, Ethan Cole, who had previously been scapegoated for one of the strikes in question. Not villain, not butcher, just a man, a witness." His phone buzzed for days afterward with numbers he didn't recognize. Journalists, old teammates, lawyers offering help, public relations firms offering to manage his narrative. He ignored most of them. He answered one. A woman from the Pentagon's Office of the Inspector General, voice steady, told him that Ace's contract had been suspended, that a criminal investigation was underway, that congressional subpoenas had been issued, that his court-martial file was being reviewed. "Mr. Cole," she said, "on a personal note, my brother was in one of the units your team relieved on rotation. He always talked about the guys who came in after them like they were superheroes. I'm sorry for what you've carried." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Rex, stretched out on the cabin floor beside him, rolled onto his back, and presented his belly like he'd just won the lottery. Life, as it turned out, kept coming. Spring came late to Lake Superior, but it came. The ice broke, grinding and groaning, and finally drifting out in dirty slabs. The bank called again about the foreclosure. This time, the tone was different. Avery's story had mentioned his ruined finances. An organization that quietly helped veterans with legal and housing crises reached out. An attorney who'd done 3 tours as a Marine offered pro bono work. They didn't erase the debt. They restructured it. The bait shop stayed. Slowly, painfully, Ethan began to turn it into what his father had dreamed and never quite managed. A small marina and tackle shop for summer tourists. A warm place for weary fishermen to drink coffee and tell lies about the size of their catch. Rex became a fixture on the dock. Kids loved him. Parents trusted him. The old men who'd spent their whole lives on the water swore he could predict storms an hour before the first dark cloud appeared, just by the way he sat and stared at the horizon. On the worst nights, when the wind battered the windows and memory still dragged him back to burning streets overseas, Ethan would wake gasping and find a heavy head pressing against his chest, amber eyes watching him until his breathing slowed. Sometimes he still heard the warehouse, still smelled smoke that wasn't there. But now, when he didn't see his own hands on the trigger. He saw signatures on contracts, emails, wire transfers. He saw the men who had thought they could own war and walk away clean. He saw Briggs sitting in that storage unit years before, knowing he couldn't stop what was coming, but refusing to let it vanish without a trace. And he saw Rex limping through a blizzard with a coin on his collar, refusing to let the last piece of truth freeze in the dark. On a soft June evening, as the sun bled gold across the edge of the lake and the dock creaked under the weight of another long day, Avery came back. She leaned on the railing, watching a knot of kids throw a tennis ball for Rex. The shepherd thundered up and down the shore, bandage paw long-heeled, launching himself into the shallows each time with a joyous abandon Ethan still couldn't quite believe. "You look better," Avery said. "So do you," Ethan replied. "Less gray." "Don't start. I have editors to terrify. I can't be going soft." They watched in silence for a moment. "You know," she said quietly, "they're talking about your case in D.C. Some people want to make you the face of this. Hearings, testimony, cameras, all that." He grimaced. "Hard pass." "I figured," she said. "Thought it might help to hear, though. You're not just a headline anymore. You're part of why this stopped." He shook his head. "Briggs is why it stopped," he said. "I just picked up where he left off." Her gaze dropped to Rex, who had just dropped the ball at the feet of a little boy in a Spider-Man shirt and was staring up at him, tail wagging, waiting for the throw. "And him?" she asked. Ethan smiled, a small, genuine thing that no longer felt foreign on his face. "He's the reason I'm still here to pick anything up," he said. "If he hadn't scratched at my door that night—" He trailed off. They both knew how that sentence ended. A breeze came off the water, cool and clean, carrying the smell of pine and fish and gasoline. The last light of day caught in Rex's coat, turning the scar on his bent ear into a silver crescent. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Avery asked. "Going somewhere warmer, quieter?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Then I remember there are storms everywhere. Here, at least, I know how the lake moves." "And you've got a co-captain who doesn't sleep on watch," she said. He glanced down at Rex, who had stopped mid-shake to watch a family on the far dock load up their boat, taking note, never really off duty. "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "I do." We may never have a Rex scratch at our door in the middle of a blizzard, dragging us back from the edge with a coin and a stare that doesn't let us lie to ourselves. We may never uncover files in a storage unit that change the course of a company or a country, but most of us know what it is to carry ghosts, guilt, grief, the weight of choices that weren't ours, but landed on our shoulders anyway. When the noise gets loud and the world feels cruel, it's easy to believe we're alone in that storm, that no one sees us losing our grip, that slipping under might be easier than clawing our way back to the surface. Loyal animals, in their quiet, stubborn way, refuse to believe that. They sit by our side when everyone else has turned away. They push their noses under our hands until we remember we're still here. They drag us outside when all we want to do is stay in the dark. They don't know about court-martials or scandals or headlines. They just know us. And sometimes, like Rex, they lead us toward the truth we've been too afraid to face, that we are more than the worst thing we've ever done, or the worst story ever told about us. The bond between a veteran and a dog like Rex isn't about heroics in war zones or dramatic showdowns in the snow. It's about something simpler and harder: staying. Staying when it's ugly. Staying when it hurts. Staying when walking into the lake feels easier than taking one more breath. We may not find secret ledgers or topple corrupt giants in our own lives, but we can answer the scratch at the door. We can pick up the phone when a friend calls in the middle of the night. We can sit on the floor with a dog whose eyes say, "I'm here, so are you, let's keep going." And in doing that, in choosing again and again to step back from the edge, to stand beside one another in the storm, we build our own kind of fortress, not of steel and guns, but of trust and love and the quiet, stubborn courage to walk into the dark together and keep walking until we find the light.